I was working in the telecom industry, and I had just joined one of the early CI/CD efforts in my workplace. And I asked my manager to explain, like, what is the current situation? What are we doing right now? And he said, well, Erik, we make releases about every 6 months, right? But the development of those releases starts typically a year before the release, and the verification is done by a separate verification team around 3 months before release. So this means that it's a long, long time between a developer working on the code and that code getting verified, on the order of several months. It's extremely unlikely, I would say, that whatever that developer is working on right now, the developer whose feature is being tested, is even remotely connected to what the verification team is testing, because that was done months ago. So for the developer then to switch into understanding the code again and fixing the bug and providing and releasing a fix requires like the mother of all context switches, and it's really not good. So my manager then proclaimed, we need to bring this time, the time from development to verification and release, from several months to just a few hours. And I remember thinking, this is a crazy big step. But it turns out it's actually not that crazy. I've been shown over and over again that it is possible. But there are prerequisites. There are things you need for that to happen. One of them is an understanding of what is taking time and where the bottlenecks are. And for that, you need metrics. So, my name is Erik Sternerson.
And my name is Andrea Frittoli. And welcome to Building DevOps Metrics for your choice of CD tools through CDEvents. And so very briefly, today we'll first learn about CDEvents, what CDEvents are. We'll talk about DevOps metrics. And finally, we'll discuss how the two fit together.
So first, I would like to say a few words about CDEvents. So the CDEvents project has as a conceptual goal to help build a common language in the CI/CD domain and surrounding domains as well. And when I say help build, I really mean that we are part of a wider effort. So, a core player here is the Interoperability Special Interest Group of the CD Foundation. So, this special interest group works with defining and establishing common terms in the CI/CD space. And a lot of the terms that end up in the CDEvents project come from this interoperability group. So we benefit a lot from their work. From the interoperability group, in late 2020, spawned a work group called, it was then called Events in CI/CD. It became a full special interest group about a year later, and the Event Special Interest Group is the root of the CDEvents project. The more concrete goal of the CDEvents project, what we're actually spending our day-to-day on, is building a specification for standardized events in continuous integration and continuous delivery. And also a set of software development kits, or SDKs, for sending and receiving events. If we were to look a little bit into the specification, it defines a number of events. This could be events related to source code, like change merged. It could be events related to pipelines, like task run started. And it could be events related to continuous deployment, like service deployed. It then also declares a set of attributes, could be optional or mandatory attributes, to describe this event in more detail. And further on, since this is based on CloudEvents, it also provides some guidance on how to use the CloudEvents attributes, such as subject and source. With this specification, we can then build SDKs in different languages for different platforms, and these SDKs provide integrators and developers with a nice experience producing and consuming events to just make life easier. And with these SDKs, we can build integrations and proof of concepts. We are not going to be demoing much integrations today. There is a talk tomorrow. It's at 4:35 in the afternoon. It's done by our community members Maurizio and Ishkan. And they will be demoing quite some cool stuff on how to use CDEvents to provide interoperability. For this talk, though, we're going to focus mainly on observability and metrics. But these integrations of proof of concepts feed back into the specification work itself. So it helps us build better things, and it helps us understand what we should be focusing on. So this, again, is part of a wider effort. We have the CDEvents team, which me and Andrea are part of. So we're sort of, I guess, driving the work to define the specification and also driving the work for some of these SDKs. But there is a lot of really positive engagement with communities of other projects like Jenkins and other projects like that who are helping build SDKs or even driving the work for some SDKs and driving the work for some integrations. So it's not just one group who sits in a room somewhere and does all the work. It's really a collaborative effort, which I think is really nice. If I were to say a few words about what we want to achieve with the specification and the SDK that we're building, I would put two concepts at the top there. Me and Andrea have done other presentations in previous conferences, which go into more detail on what I'm going to talk about next, so you can go look at those if you're interested in more. But they are interoperability, so making things work together, and observability, so making it easy for external systems or people to figure out what is happening and how are things going. And observability allows us to define and calculate metrics. And for this talk, specifically, we are looking at 4 major DevOps metrics. So, Andrea, would you like to say a few words about those?
Thank you, Erik. And thanks for the great introduction on CDEvents. So, if you look at the State of DevOps report, which has been published by Puppet and sponsored by several organizations, I mean, it's been running for about 10 years now, I think. And yeah, they look at how different organizations implement DevOps practices. And they identified metrics that can be used as like measurable outcomes to qualify how the implementation of DevOps practices is, how efficient it is. And so they divide different organization and high-performing, mid-performing, or low-performing. And specifically, they use 4 metrics, which are we call the Dora Metrics, that were initially identified by Dora, which is the DevOps research and assessment organization. And those 4 metrics are the deployment frequency, which is basically about how often do we deploy our code into production, the lead time for changes, which is a metric that tells us how long it takes for a certain change in the code to actually end up running in production environment. Then we have the change failure rate, which is tells us about how often a change that we perform in the production environment turns out to be causing an issue in our service. And finally, the time to restore service, which tells us how long it takes after a failure to restore the service to normality. And so these 4 metrics, they do not cover necessarily all the aspects of DevOps, but they give us a good feeling of how well an organization is performing. In their DevOps implementation. Organization may define their own metrics, but we take this as a starting point to work with CDEvents. So how can we then measure metrics through CDEvents?
Yes, so let's look at the first metric. Ooh, it's the simple one. Thank you, Andrea. Deployment frequency. So it's just about figuring out how often do we deploy new versions of whatever we're building. So let's look at a setup like this. We have some sort of orchestrator. This could be Tecton, controlling kubectl to deploy stuff. It could be Argo, Spinnaker, Captain, or one of the other DevOps automation tools. But their responsibility is to listen to our requests and make sure things are deployed that we would like them to. So let's then say that we get a new delivery of our application. So we get the new version, and we also, let's say we made a configuration change to say that we also want to have a new deployment of our application. So one upgrade, one new deployment. In CDEvents, we have messages for this already. For the upgrade, we have an event called service upgraded, and for the deployment, we have an event called service deployed. Importantly, these events state what we are deploying, to what version we are deploying it, and in what environment. And this is sufficient information for an observer able to listen to these events to detect whenever we suddenly start talking about the new version, because that means we have a new version deployed, and can calculate this metric. So, an easy one to get started. Andrea, do you want to complicate things for us a bit?
Yes, thanks, Erik. Yeah, the next one is a bit more involved. Nice bullet. So it's a lead time for changes. And here, so we start from the SCM, so the software configuration management tool, where changes in the code happen. And let's see if I can use the pointer. Yeah, so you may have different options there. You may have your GitLab or GitHub or Bitbucket or any tool that you're using there. But regardless of the tool that you're using, you're going to have a repository where the change is made at a certain timestamp where the change has happened. And so we codified this into the change type of events in CDEvents. Like here we're showing the the change merged use case, which is relevant for a metric. But is that enough information? So if we now look at the next step, is the build system, which is creating the artifact, which is then going to be deployed into production. Again, depending on the type of artifact, we have several options. So we're showing here a few tools for container images, like from Shipwright, Builda, Canico, or you can have tools wrapped into like orchestration systems like Tekton or Jenkins. And so as long as you have a simple scenario where you have a series of changes, like change 1, change 2, change 3 happening in your source code, and then you have a build, you will have also the change merged event and the artifact published event associated to that. And then you will have more changes, then another build. So in that case, then it's enough to rely on the repository and the timestamp. But in real life, in most use cases, you will have much more complicated scenarios. So you may have builds running in parallel. So you may be having multiple branches that you're working with. So you may be backporting changes, so running a build that is actually on certain code that is not the latest code that you have in your repository. So to handle those use cases, then you need more information. And for that, in the CDEvents, we have the ID of a change that is merged in the change merged event. And on the artifact published or the artifact events in general, we can represent the ID of the last change that was included in that specific build. And that allows us to go back then to the SCM and ask, is that change that we look in the change merge event included in this specific build? All right. Unfortunately, there is no single common interface in the different SCM system to ask this question, but we hope that we can foster this kind of interface from being created through this kind of standardization process. And of course, I forgot to mention it in the beginning, but here we are looking at a very simple use case where just one artifact that is changed, built, and finally deployed, which is the next step. And for deployment also we have specific events. In this case, we're showing the service deployed event. And again, you may have multiple deployment system. You could have something like Captain or Spinnaker, Argo, Flax, Screwdriver, well, a few of them. This is not an extensive, a complete list anyways. And the deploy event needs to be correlated to the artifact publish event, and that can be done through the artifact ID. So when the deployment system knows that a certain artifact was published, it uses that ID to retrieve the artifact and deploying it into the system. And then this artifact ID must be included in all the service-related events so that we may know the specific artifact version that was installed in the environment. Of course, we may have, in real life, more sophisticated scenarios where instead of having a single artifact being deployed, we have actually multiple artifacts being combined together and deployed into a system. And so we are looking into the CDEvents specification, the concept of compositions that would help us to identify and track this kind of scenarios through events. Yeah, that's it.
So, with everything deployed, next we should ask ourselves, will it always work? And unless you are way better developers and DevOps people than I am, then the answer is no, it will not always work. So calculating the change failure rate is important. It's a good metric as well. So we could define this metric, and I think it actually is defined, as the number of deployments over the number of incidents that occur or failures that occur. So this brings up two questions that we should look into first. First question, the deployment part is easy. We actually already looked at that, but instead of counting the versions that we deploy, we just count the number of deployments. We already have the messages for that. Now we come to the two questions that I wanted to ask about incidents. The first one would be, what can cause an incident? So an obvious one is that there is an error in the application, or a bug. It's definitely common and definitely something that we want to be able to detect and typically can detect. But it doesn't have to be just the application itself. It can be the configuration of the application. So a user or whoever is operating or deploying your application has made an error in the configuration that causes things to either not come up at all or degrade in some way. And it can be completely unrelated to the application. It could be something related to the environment, like network performance or power outage or anything like that. And it could be many other things as well, but they all contribute to incidents. They all affect your end users in some way or another. So given that we have these different types of incidents, another question to ask is, who can discover these incidents? Well, an obvious one, perhaps, would be the orchestrator or the DevOps automation tool that is deploying your service and expecting it to come up. And if it doesn't come up, then that's a clear case of an incident having happened, and then we know that we can send information about that. It could also be some monitoring tool. So you have Prometheus looking into the network latency of your endpoints, or you're looking at other environment-related things. So that could then raise an incident. It could be the application itself that through some health check or some introspection realizes that it's currently not doing very well and raises an incident about that. And we could even go entirely out of the sort of automation space and just say that users can detect incidents and your operations team can detect incidents. So we need to find a way to allow these very different sources to send incidents in a way that we can collect them all and calculate metrics from them. And if you were to ask me and Andrea how to do it, we are of course very, very biased, and we would say, send an incident event. That's what we want to do. So given something like this, we have the two deployments, we have the orchestrator, we have a monitor, and we have the observer as well. Then it's just about starting to send events. So if the orchestrator finds something, it sends an event. If the monitor finds, or the application finds, or even user finds, they all send incident events. There may absolutely be a case where multiple incidents events actually relate to the same incident. So it's important to send the correct metadata in the incidents to, for instance, understand that both the application itself and the monitor detected this incident. So it's not two separate incidents, but we still want to be able to count it. So it's still good if both of them send events. And with this information and the number of deployments that I showed you before, we have enough information to calculate the change failure rate. Yes.
Thanks, Erik. So next, we have the time to restore service. So we had a failure in production. We want to measure how much time it takes us to get the service back to normal. And again, we have similar questions, parallel. What can restore the service? So it can be that we restore a service by performing a rollback, or maybe installing a brand new version of our service, which included a patch or a fix for the bug that was encountered. It could be that we do a configuration change. It could be scaling up either horizontally or vertically, so adding more resources to our service that fixes the issue. It could be a change to an external dependency. So for instance, if our application depends on another microservice that was failing and that is fixed, or if the network is repaired, there was a failure there, then we restore the service. Yeah. So, but then who generates those events, right? About the resolution of the service being restored. So again, it can be the orchestrator that sends a resolution event. And a use case, a specific use case here could be, for instance, if you're using Knative to run your service. Knative is a platform for doing like serverless type of work. So it means that, and Knative has an interesting feature that it's able to, it has an autoscaler that can look into metrics, for instance, generated by Prometheus, and is able to scale up and down your service automatically. And so you could consider a scenario where a certain metric, like the response time of your service, is degraded. And then you could have Knative sending an event that tells us that there is an incident that is happening. And then the autoscaler scales the service up, and once the scaling is actually happening, then it would send an incident resolve event. Another use case could be that the monitoring system, maybe Prometheus, that is reading the metrics, is also saying, okay, now the service is behaving normally and is sending a resolution event. And finally, we could have like the application sending a resolution event, or even an end user or an operator of the system that says, okay, now this issue has been resolved, and maybe writes an issue with your backtracker of choice, and that ends up in actually sending an event. So one thing that I wanted to mention is that we don't have all these events defined fully spec'd yet in CDEvents, but we are working into the specification of these. There are a few pieces of data that we know that are going to be required, like the environment ID, so we need to be able to discuss about which environment a certain incident happened into. We need to know which service are we referring to, and we need to know which version of this service are we talking about. But other information that we are considering is probably going to be optional, because as showing in this picture, this kind of event may come from many different parties, and they may have a different kind of context about the incident, so they may know more or less about what's happening. And in fact, one of the things that we are considering is that for this specific kind of events, we will need to allow having multiple events being sent about the same incident resolution case. And then it will be the job of the observer finally to kind of collate all these events and put all the metadata together so that we can use that information finally to calculate the metric. Another thing that I wanted to mention about this is that the Captain project, Captain is from the CNCF. They have a set of events that they use for application lifecycle events, they call them. So they have abstractions about SLI, SLOs, and what they call problems, or we call them incident. So we are still discussing about the nomenclature there. But they kindly offer to donate those set of events to the CDEvents project. So we are discussing with them and see whether it would be a good fit. And probably the answer is yes, but we need to kind of work to align the specification there. So we are looking forward to getting this kind of events into the main spec with the help of Captain project as well.
So we're nearing the end of the talk, and I would like to discuss some key takeaways. One is to calculate these metrics, we need a lot of data from a lot of different sources. And gathering that up requires, or could require, a whole lot of integration into your build systems, your source code even, and orchestration and all that stuff. Because most people typically don't have just one single aligned environment and using one solve everything platform to do everything. It's a mishmash of different tools and services. So there are things we can do to help, and a common language is one of those things. So rather than worrying about all these different tools and services that you need to collect data from, having something like CDEvents, where you can, instead of looking directly into all these tools, just get standardized events like change merge, artifact published, service deployed, and incident resolved, which we have looked at today. That makes it a lot easier for an observer to gather up all the data that it needs. I should mention here as well also the OpenTelemetry project, which is definitely highly related to parts of what we are doing. They are a bit more into tracing. We are a bit more into higher level or more abstract events, I would say. But I think a collaboration there could also really help boost things forward. But me and Andrea and the rest of the team are not going to be able to solve this on our own. So, as always, we want to leave you with a call to action. There's a lot of things you could do, some very simple, that would really benefit the CDEvents project. It's everything from just providing feedback on the work that we're doing, or presenting your use cases. What are you struggling with today that could be solved using events? All the way through working with integrations in your own projects, or helping build SDKs, or just getting involved in the community. So the best way forward for that would be to go to cdevents.dev. There you can find our work, you can find how to get in touch, how to become a part of the community, and all resources, links that we have. There is also a CDEvents white paper somewhere in this building. Where is it, Andrea?
Yes, in the sponsor showcase, we have a CDEvents table with white papers there, so feel free to grab one. We have some stickers as well. And if you want to chat about CDEvents, we'll either be there or find us around in the conference. It's not too huge space, and we can then meet there at the table and have a chat.
Yes. So, I've been Erik Sternerson. This is Andrea Frittoli, and we would like to thank you so much for attending, and we will open the floor for questions. Yes, we have a question. You have a microphone coming, I think, if you just hang on for a second, so we can get it for the virtual audience as well.
Hi, Beth Paraso from Tech Target. Just curious, I know it's very early, but once this kind of standardization becomes available, how would an end user take advantage of it or deploy it? Has that been determined yet? How someone would actually get this into their environment?
So the way this is going to work, as I see it as well, and you will have to let me know if you disagree, Andrea, step by step, as we start to define the events that one particular project either needs to send, and by project I mean something like Jenkins or Argo or Captain, that they either need to send or receive, then they can adopt the CDEvents specification and sort of become CDEvents compliant, if you want to call it that. So they are sending and receiving events according to the specification. And same would be, or I think this opens up an interesting venue for observability and metrics solutions, things that are quite hard to do today because you have to basically decide on a subset of tools and things you want to support. But as more things start producing CDEvents, you can say, okay, what I'm going to focus on is getting observability on things that produce CDEvents. So an end user probably wouldn't worry that much about the protocol itself, but they would benefit from using tools and solutions that produce CDEvents and that consume CDEvents. Of course, there are end users who may want to build CDEvents into their own build script or things like that, and then the way that we would approach it is to just get one of our SDKs and use that to produce events. Would you say that covers it, Andrea?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we really hope to foster kind of an ecosystem of tools around this CDEvents. So And then, right, if you're an organization and you have quite a few of the tools that maybe more listed below, and then you have a new team that has certain skills, so they want to try a new tool. As long as these tools produce CDEvents, then you can swap with another tool or plug in a new tool, and then you still have your metrics basically available.
Yes.
Hey, I think it would be really neat if systems like GitHub or PagerDuty or Harness emitted CDEvents. I'm going to suspect that maybe you think that too. If not, tell me why not. But if so, how do we get there?
Yes, so this has been a continuous, I guess, both struggle, but also inspirational for us, we're always looking for like, who is the right person to talk to in these organizations to get a discussion started. And we're always trying to network in one way or another. So that's an open call to action to everyone as well. If you know anyone in any organization that could produce CDEvents, that may be like a good person to talk to, just send them our way. You can point to CDEvents.dev and they can get in touch that way, because I think that's the way we're going to do it. It's going to have to be by finding the right people to talk to foster some enthusiasm about CDEvents and also help them do the actual integration. And I absolutely agree. Having, for instance, GitHub producing CDEvents can really be a good start of a chain, like what Andrea showed before in the like change merged and those kind of events. So yes, absolutely, we are very, very interested in that as well. And we're figuring out how to do it. I'm not sure how we're doing on time. I would like to answer. Is it okay if we take some more questions? I guess we're almost over time. Yeah, let's do one more.
Hi, Deepak from Intel. So you said that different services are going to send different incidents, and what is the intelligence that determines that this happened from the same event? How do we remove the duplicates from the services?
I think there will have to be some different strategies there. You could, I mean, a reasonable assumption, I would say, is if two incidents relate to the same deployment and they come very close to each other, it may be good enough to just say these are probably the same incident. Even if we can't prove that it's the same incident, it's still, it would affect the same users the same way anyway. So that's a simplification, but I figure that's where we're going to start probably. But as we learn more about people's use cases and we learn more about the tools that would produce these events, I'm sure we can come up with more clever ways to correlate events as well.
Do you think having like a map of the pipeline would help you in determining that event structure?
The more data we get, the more data mining we can get, of course.
Yeah, indeed. I guess that's one of the ideas as well. If you have the data in a consistent format, I mean, it's a complex problem. There's no denying it, and there's so many different scenarios. But at least if you have a common language, then it makes sense to start developing this solution to this complex problem in a way that are reusable by everyone, because if everyone speaks the same language and you invest a lot of effort, like also as a community, a different organization, developing a solution for that, then it's reusable for everyone.
So yes, unfortunately we're going to have to wrap up because we have another group of people coming in soon. But please come and talk to me and Andrea. We will be here at the stage for a few minutes. And we will again really like to thank you all for showing up and listening. And CDEvents.dev is where you're going to find us. And we'll be very happy to have you involved in one way or another.
Yeah, if you're still around on Friday morning, there's going to be CDEvents Community Summit, 3 hours. So we have a room, so come and meet us.
Thank you again.